All right, I think it's about the time to get started. So, welcome everyone to MACOY's first speaker series of the year. So today we are doing STEM, and we are featuring students who are studying careers in STEM. So before we get started, a few details you might want to know are this, as many of you know, this meeting is being recorded and it'll be posted to our website. So any youth who want to watch it again or who couldn't make it will be able to get this information. And also, any questions that you guys have can be put in the chat, and they will be answered after the interview portion. So first, to our speakers, why don't you introduce yourselves and your exact fields of study, and what years are you in, and what schools, stuff like that.
Hi everyone, I'm Justin. I'm at the U of A studying computer engineering with a minor in math. I'm in my third year and I'm also in the co-op program, so I am doing work experience during my degree.
Hi, I'm the second speaker. My name's Ishan, and I'm also a third year doing electrical engineering co-op. And yeah.
Ishan, your lighting just makes your face.
Yeah, I know. I can't really fix it. I only have overhead lighting. I can try shutting the blinds if that helps. Just give me a moment.
Maybe.
So for anyone who doesn't know, would you mind explaining what a co-op degree is?
Yeah, sure. So co-op is pretty much just a kind of fancy word for doing work terms throughout your degree. Overall, in a co-op degree, you do 20 months of work terms, and those work terms can be during the summer or during the fall or winter. For my program, usually you work for one summer, and then you do a semester or two, and then you work for 8 months, do a semester or two, and then work for another 8 months until you finally come back and finish your last semester and graduate.
Oh, that's awesome. So Justin, I will be interviewing you first, and then Aveen will be interviewing Ishan. So Justin, what made you choose computer engineering as a degree? Or sorry, computer science?
Computer engineering, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Computer science is a science degree, so it is a bit different. I was always kind of had an interest in technology and computers, building computers, just playing on them, honestly. So going into computer engineering felt like a pretty natural progression. It was one of the only engineering disciplines that like really stood out to me. As well, I'll probably reference this a couple times, but I have an older brother who's in computer engineering, and he really was able to show me some of the cool stuff that you get to do in the program. And that's kind of why I'm here today, because I want to tell other people about why it's a cool program.
Yeah. So as we know, STEM degrees are often really difficult and competitive to get into. So for computer engineering, how did you find the application process, and was it difficult to get into?
So I guess that's kind of a two-part question, because as I understand, most of our participants are in high school or going into high school. First, at the U of A, you have to get into the engineering program, which is just based off your high school marks. Usually the averages are high 80s-ish will get you into the program. A lot of kids, usually about 1,000 kids, go into the program every year. So focusing on your grade 11 and 12 marks is pretty much what will get you into engineering. After that, you do a general first year where you just take courses on math, physics, chemistry, kind of just get like a baseline of knowledge for all your future courses. And then based on your first year's grades, you select which discipline you want to go to. This could be computer, electrical, chemical, mechanical engineering. And if you have high grades, you'll get into your first choice, sorry. If you have lower grades, you might get into your second or third choice, and so on. So it is competitive in just getting into the degree, then also maintaining a good first year GPA so you can get into the exact program you want.
That's really interesting. So speaking of the U of A, how did you decide which university to attend?
Oh yeah, okay. So from my understanding as well, this is mostly based out of Fort Mac, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm from Grand Prairie. So pretty close. And U of A is just the closest university. I guess there's a couple of factors. It's a close university. It has a good engineering program. It's one of the top in Canada. As well as not crazy expensive, Edmonton and the U of A. I did consider going somewhere like UBC maybe or U of T, but moving all that way into very expensive cities, it just didn't seem worth it for me. So I settled on the U of A because I knew a lot of people going there, including my family, and it was just close to home.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm actually in grade 12 too, so going through a similar process
Awesome.
of like where to go. So how different do you think university life is from high school? Because I've heard a lot of things. Is there anything you can do to ease the transition?
I would say it's quite different in general, especially if you are moving away from home to like a new city you've never lived in before. I like to think of it as like a more or less scale. There's less time you spent in class a lot of days. You might only go to class for 2 or 3 hours, but there's more things to do outside of class. You pretty much just show up to class, get the essential information, write it down, or get the notes, type it out. And then once you actually get home after, that's when you go work on your assignments. That's when you review. That's when you do like a study guide before a test. Usually the professors are there just to give you all the information you need and you kind of handle the rest of it, which I found quite different from high school where you have teachers available every single day and lots of support. As for easing the transition, I would say specifically for engineering, I found it really helpful just to have realistic expectations. It is a big change to move to a new city, go to a university, have new classes, new people. A lot of your same friends won't be there. So just go easy on yourself. It is hard. Oftentimes the first year is the hardest for a lot of people because all that change requires time to adjust to. But I think in the end, it's very worth it.
Oh, absolutely. And for just kind of about you, obviously it's about university, but about like the classes. How did you find the class sizes? Did they ever feel impersonal or just too big, or did you have smaller classes too?
So the class sizes, usually your smallest class you can get is maybe around 20 to 30 people, and that would be like specifically for a lab. So that would just be for one portion of the class. Whereas actual lectures, which are where you spend most of your time, could be up to 300 or 400 people in some of your big classes. So this would be like your first year chemistry, where like everyone takes first year chemistry in almost any science degree. So I didn't have a problem with them being big. It does feel, I guess, a little impersonal sometimes when you ask a question and it's just a big crowd of people, and a lot of people don't like to ask questions because you get 100 people turning to look at you. But the professors do know their stuff, and I always encourage people to still make that point, because usually if you have a question with hundreds of other kids around you, someone else also has that question.
Yeah.
So I don't find it a bad thing, but it definitely is something to get used to.
Oh, that's great. So, Justin, I know you talked about shorter classes, but a lot of work as well. What was a common daily workload like for you?
So something about university as well is that like your schedule really dictates how you spend your days. For instance, right now I'll go to class on a Friday from maybe 9 to 11, and then I'm done for the rest of the day. Whereas my Tuesdays, I have class from 8 to 2, and then I have a lab from 2 to 5. So I have like 8 hours of class that day. As for the workload balance, a lot of times you'll hear the recommendation where each hour of class time is about 2 hours out of class you'll probably spend on doing things, or you should spend on doing things. I would find that's accurate, as usually we'll aim for about 3 hours of lecture time a week for a class, but then there's often a lot of weekly assignments, so spend a couple hours doing assignments throughout the week for each class, and it just adds up is that you have usually a couple hours every day of things you should be doing.
Wow. So more than high school.
Yeah, a little bit.
And I know organization and responsibility are key parts of staying like balanced and in a university. So did you have a job or extracurriculars? And if so, how did you balance them with schoolwork?
In university, no, I did not. My first year is pretty busy again with all that change to adjust to.
Mhm.
I did not feel like it was something I was capable of, and I honestly probably wouldn't recommend it for people going into engineering. Um, you do take 6 classes a semester, which usually another student will usually take 4 or 5 if they were in like science or arts maybe. So you do have just more work than a lot of other peers around you. Um, and it's beneficial for you to focus that time on school. And when you're not at school or doing schoolwork, it's okay to take that time just for yourself, unwind, or do something fun.
Oh, that's a good way of thinking. So a lot of these past questions have been about education, the education part of university. But what about like university life? So just to start off, what advice do you have for the intimidating cost of tuition?
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely a tough one because tuition has risen in the past few years. Um, if you have decent marks and you're keen about going to university, chances are you're also eligible for some scholarships. So apply to as many as you can, even if you don't think you fit the criteria 100%, still just apply. Um, and usually once you start applying to a couple, you'll get pretty fast at writing them and can do a good job. Um, Other than scholarships, I would say talk with any of your family, um, see if they have any plan. I know a lot of families have like RESPs, savings accounts for college education, but it's good to know that like before you're even applying to university, kind of know what your financials are looking like so that you can have realistic expectations and start to plan. Okay, do I need to take a loan? Should I save my money from summer jobs to maybe pay for school in a year or so? That would probably be my greatest recommendation.
Oh, cool. So this is another cost, not necessarily education, but what was your living situation like?
So in my first year, I lived in a residence on U of A campus. I lived in the St. Joe's dorms, which are they're a bit smaller. It's about 50 to 60 guys. There is a men's building and then there's a women's building as well. Another common one, which most students go to, is Lister residence on U of A. Um, I would say that residence, although it has its downsides, it also has like great benefits, as in you get to meet a lot of people, you get to be right on campus, it's easy to get involved. Um, and I would recommend it for people going into university because it just makes that transition a lot more comfortable, I would say. There's a lot of people in the same boat as you, moving to a new city, new place. Um, it's quite easy to make friends just through that commonality.
Yeah. So did you room with someone at all?
So I only lived in my residence for first year, but now I've moved out into my own apartment
Mhm.
in Edmonton. So now I have a roommate, just one of my friends. He's also in engineering. That is something to consider after you're nearing maybe the end of your first year. Um, is that if you have any friends there in dorms and would like to move out with them, like talk about it, maybe see their living situations. Do you think they're clean or good people to live with. But yes, now I do have a roommate. And when everything was online during COVID, I moved back home to Grand Prairie.
That makes sense. And this ties into the organization we talked about earlier. How did you budget?
It's a lot of budgeting can be done. What I pretty much did was figure out my main costs for the semester. Okay, I'm paying, $4,000 in tuition this semester. My rent or my residence will cost $5,000 this semester, maybe. And then once those big costs are kind of figured out, find a way to get money for that, whether it's your own savings, family savings, or student loans, and kind of just set that aside. Then whatever else money is remaining, kind of just divvy that up throughout the weeks. So usually I'll aim to spend like $100 to $150 a week max, just off groceries, fun stuff, things like that. Just because once I had that monetary value, once you divide it up per week, you'll see that spending $300 a week is not really feasible.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned groceries, but are there options for meal plans? Because I know a lot of universities have those.
Yeah, in first year I did have a meal plan, and it was honestly nice. Living in residence, I did spend a lot less money out of pocket. I think that's actually like an underrated thing of residence is that when you live on campus and you have a full meal plan, like pretty much right in front of you 3 times a day, there's a lot less chance of you going out and spending money unnecessarily, as well as you save time on cooking and doing dishes, things like that. Um, my residence did have a meal plan. I know Lister residence also has one. And there are also a bunch of restaurants all over campus if you do budget for that. I think it's okay to budget for eating out a couple times a month maybe, but usually I'll try and pack lunches now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I know in the beginning I asked you what made you choose computer engineering as a degree, but was this something that you always knew you wanted to do, or was it a more recent decision? Because I know deciding on a degree is often very difficult.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't a really hard choice. My older brother being in engineering and specifically computer engineering, he really gave me like pretty much this whole rundown of what was going to go on. I pretty much interviewed him just like this. And I didn't really consider or apply to any other programs. I thought maybe computer science would be a secondary um, choice, but I knew that I always wanted something in STEM. I really liked math. I really liked science. And I find that engineering has enough intensity that you actually feel like you're pushing yourself to a higher level. You're not like settling down. You're always learning more, always trying to be kind of the next best student. And I think the level of professionalism that comes out, like once you get a career after, is something that I was happy with as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're pretty passionate about your degree, but were there any parts of the journey that you found frustrating?
Yes, of course. I think anyone's lying in university and in engineering if they say that they haven't been stumped, if they haven't been frustrated, um, if they haven't thought about, if university is even right for them on those tough days.
Yeah.
I would say like the most frustrating part is that this might be more specific to engineering, but having a lot of classes, you'll get kind of a lot of information thrown at you, and you can't really expect yourself to understand everything 100% when you only see it once or twice. So you go to a lecture and you get the information, and then you go home 1 or 2 days later and go do the assignment. It might be frustrating when you don't really understand what's going on. Um, like in the course, it does take some more time to kind of review and make sure that you understand things before you approach that. So I did find it a bit frustrating at first, is that I was naturally getting by pretty easily in high school, but it did take more time to actually understand what was going on in university. But that you do overcome that, and I think that's a really important part, is that being able to just sit down sometimes, do your best and figure something out, make sure to take a step back and then reapproach it with maybe a different perspective. And eventually you always figure it out, but I think that persistence is really important.
Oh, thank you, Justin. So, on the other hand, what parts of the journey did you find the most exciting?
There are a lot of exciting things. I mean, the whole moving to university is pretty exciting just in itself. Meeting all these other students who are in a similar scenario as you, as they just moved there. They also love science, technology, math. You get to meet some pretty awesome people, especially meeting the older year students who are in, like, when you're in first year and you go meet the third and fourth years, and they can show you all the cool things. I think that's pretty awesome about university as well. When you do finally find a subject that you really like, such as mine's computer engineering, or you find a class that's really working well for you, it's really rewarding just to do work in that class and actually feel like you're learning something.
Yeah. And also, are there any misconceptions about the field of engineering or computer engineering in specific?
I think one that it's probably common to all university students, but a lot of people think that if they're smart enough to do something, and especially with, I guess, engineering, is that you take a bunch of kids who've gotten 80 and 90s in high school, who've done well, who feel like they're smart, and you put them all into one room, and you get an engineering class. And then once things start getting tough, people start doubting themselves. Oh, I'm not smart enough for this. I'm not cut out for this. Um, and there actually be a lot of negative thoughts. People will call themselves dumb because they couldn't understand this one assignment. But I don't think that's actually truthful. I think pretty much anyone can do it, as long as you've taken the courses in high school. If you've made it into engineering, you definitely can do it. The thing that will like separate you from the rest is that if you have that like a bit of persistence and drive, and can sit down and do some practice problems, and read and learn and try and understand it your own way, rather than just trying to let like your smarts carry you through. Because in the end, it's not really about who's smartest. It's about who's worked the hardest, who's passionate about it, who's like really trying and setting good goals and working towards them.
Yeah, for sure. And I've heard like a lot of people who they think they're smart, and then they don't really work hard in high school, and then they get to university and it's a huge wake up call. So no, that's great to hear.
Exactly. Yeah.
So finally, what was the best advice you learned that helped you on your university journey?
Best advice. Hmm. I would say probably just having my expectations to be tempered to what the program was going to be like. Luckily, I had my brother to help me along, but I remember uh, one of my first labs, I like barely finished, and I was kind of scared because I was like, wow, I barely finished this. In high school, I've like never not finished a test before. Um, so it was kind of shocking for me as well. I think just again having that understanding that it's not all going to come easy. Um, it does take time and effort. It's okay to not get 100% anymore on every single thing, especially as things are graded on a bell curve. So even if you don't get 100%, you can still get an A, kind of thing. But just be realistic with yourself. It's okay to not know something. It doesn't mean that you're dumb. It just means you haven't learned it yet. And when you actually just put in a bit of time, don't panic, take it slow. I think that's just really like the key to success.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Justin. I think that concludes our interview. So I think Alvin, you can interview Ishan. And if anyone has any questions, remember you can type them in the chat and they will be answered after the interview portion. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Hey, Cameron. I was going to say, like, if anyone has a question right now and they want to pop in, like, we have some time. So if there's anyone who wants to, like, unmute their mic and maybe put up your hand if you have a question quickly. If not, or when we get through these questions, I think we're going to take maybe a 5-minute quick break, and then we'll get to Oveen and Ishan. So any questions, please put up your hand. We have Justin here able to answer any questions you have about computer engineering.
Please feel free to ask about anything, like even if it's something really specific, there aren't any dumb questions. Looks like Caspi has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what's your favorite part about your degree?
My favorite part is there's a couple parts I really like. I'm a pretty big math guy, so I actually really like the math that goes on. In my degree, I love learning about it. As well, in computer engineering specific, I really like how that I'm learning the depths of something that I've been passionate about for quite a few years. And now that I have like my computer sitting right in front of me, I can actually start to figure out how it's working and even get to the point where I start to make my own, which I find is my favorite part. Just learning about a field that I'm really passionate about.
That's good to hear.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Feel free. All right. Well, if there's no questions, or not right now, we are going to take a quick 5-minute break. So if you could return to your computer at around 2:37, we will get started again with Oveen and Ishan. Thank you, guys.
Hey, Sean, how's your classes been? Gotta unmute yourself. You still haven't unmuted.
Okay, wait, is it working now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Classes are tough this year for me, that's all I can say. Dude, no, they give you so many labs now compared to first year.
How are you finding
know.
math? How are you finding 309?
Okay, math isn't that bad. I just make small mistakes, which cost me a lot on the midterm as well. It's just pretty bad. But it's pretty easy for this math, though. I don't like the physics, though. I will say that.
Which physics are you taking?
Well, every electrical engineer has to take a course called electromagnetics and do that. It's so terrible. So it's like a combination of statics. It's a combination of physics 230. If you took it, it's like a combination of a lot of algebra. Huh?
I'm taking 230 next semester.
Oh, you're taking? Yeah, I think it's no.
Yeah,
I think it's
that's electrostatics, isn't it?
No, electrostatics is different. I have electromagnetics. Oh. It's so much physics. It's too much. I'm just not a big fan of physics, so it's like it just doesn't work out well for me. Dude, I never thought I'd have to do physics again. That's why I took this degree, man. But yeah. Oh, luckily GPA won't matter after this work term since I found an internship, right? It won't be as like a big of an impact as it would normally make.
Yeah, for sure.
So at least there's that. What about you?
Not too bad. I my first final next Wednesday. I thought it was on Monday, but turns out it's not.
Yeah, mine's on Monday. I haven't got too much studying in for it because of all the other labs and stuff that you still have to hand in on the last week. I don't know if you got any assignments for the last week, but I had a lot.
No, I my profs, like for 202 and 210,
Yeah.
they just they didn't assign the last two assignments. They just gave it to us as practice problems.
Dude, I missed those courses. They were some of the easiest courses you would have to take. Especially
I don't know.
210.
I'm finding
Is
that's what I'm
202
most
bad?
worried about.
I'll say 210. Really?
210, yeah. I did well in the midterm, but I feel like I have to catch up a bit on like some of the end of course stuff, like the flip
Right.
flops, and to memorize the excitation tables.
Dude, I loved the logics course. It was like
Yeah,
it was like the
the
most
logic
peaceful.
is fun though.
Yeah. I swear, like the first time I was introduced to it, it looked so fun. I was like, that's like the favorite course I've done so far. 202 isn't bad besides the second half. I hated the phaser stuff though. But it's something that you have to build off of a lot later on, so it's good to know it.
Yeah, I know.
Because you're gonna have to. I think you'll have to do it if you end up taking 302, which I think you
Yeah,
do.
I'll take 203 and 302.
Yeah, because it's gonna be the exact same as mine, and I think it's all phasers, a lot of it.
See, I'm in computer engineering. I don't mess with AC current. I only like direct current.
No. You're doing a lot of DC stuff as well.
Oh, is there? Awesome.
Most of the stuff is DC, and then you go do AC conversions and stuff. But it's like, I don't know. Still a bad subject. I mean, the professor's really good though for that course. If you ever get him, take Manny. Beautiful guy.
Please, everyone listening, don't let Ashan. He does enjoy what he's doing.
No, I do. There's no other reason I would take the degree if I didn't enjoy it. No,
All right.
but no. Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's great. So Oveen, I'll hand it over to you whenever you're ready. It is 2:37, and we'll try to keep. I mean, we're way ahead of schedule, so no rush for sure. But
Okay. Sure.
thank you.
Okay.
And again, any questions? Throw it in the chat.
Yeah. So, Ishan, you said you're in electrical engineering?
Yep.
What made you choose that degree?
So for me, at first, I'll be honest, I wasn't quite sure what degree to take when I did start engineering, right? The reason I chose engineering in the first place is because you have like a wide variety like to choose from, right? Because you have mechanical, chemical, civil. Depending on what you want to do, there's even biomedical for like those students who like biology and like the physics aspect. There's also that, right? So the reason I chose electrical engineering specifically was one, mainly because of the growing technology industry. When it comes to things like automation, software, and just technology overall, I feel like the world is becoming more dependent on it as it goes on and on. So you're going to have a higher chance of finding a job related to those fields. Like, don't get me wrong, you'll always have a need for things like mechanical and civil engineering for construction and things like that, right? But I just felt like maybe going into a growing industry might be good. So that was like my main reason. But then I chose electrical specifically because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in the ECE field, ECE meaning electrical and computer engineering. It also includes things like software, right? So I wasn't sure if I wanted to go into software specifically yet, or if I wanted to do computer like Justin, right? And go on to like more of a hardware software kind of side. So I chose electrical since even though it is an electrical engineering degree, 50% of it is probably related to things like circuitry, right? And the other half is mainly software and then hardware. So as you go on, you do learn about those two things, right? And that's the main reason I took it, because I wanted to understand more about these fields while like not being fully committed to them. So this way in the future, if I do decide to go into one of these specifically, like specialize in them, doing like a master's degree or anything, I would have a better understanding of if I really want to pursue this type of field or not.
Okay, yeah, that seems smart. And you mentioned like if you were to pursue a master's degree, like what would that be in? Like what specifics?
So if you're I believe that electrical engineering is one of the most versatile fields you can choose to do a master's degree in, specifically because it encompasses anything related to technology, right? An example would be doing something like data science, since data science is actually, it's a small industry right now, but it's growing pretty rapidly, considering how much people rely on software organization and so on and so forth, right? Then you have other things like going specifically into something like power engineering, right? Or doing hardware or computer engineering. There's all kinds of different things that you can specialize in for your master's degree. Of course, having a master's specialization in something will help you find a job in a specific field a lot faster than normal people, right? Which is quite nice.
Okay, well, that's cool. It's cool how many options you have.
Yeah.
So obviously engineering and just STEM
Yeah.
degrees in general are quite competitive. So what was the application process like for you?
So the application process was the same as Justin's. I believe that U of A in specific, or most universities, usually don't tend to look at your extracurriculars. They'll only look at your grades for this. For engineering, they would look at chemistry and physics. They normally don't look at biology. Then they'll look at your math, your English, and mainly all of those subjects. Of course, for U of A, I believe they have something called conditionals if you're doing early applications to get accepted or to get a reply back from them early on. It changes each year. So sometimes it'll be low, sometimes it'll be high, right? So it's like for my year specifically, it was around like high 80s. So about an 85 is what you needed to get early admission in something like sometime in October, right? But I do know that for other universities, I'm just speaking from my experience. So something like UBC, U of T, Waterloo, right? Those universities do look at your extracurriculars quite heavily, and they do have an interview process for certain things, right? So for UBC, if you wanted to do something like a dual program, which is like taking something like engineering and taking a business minor or another type of minor on the side, you would have to do a video interview process for that. I believe for Waterloo, you also have to do a video interview process. And it's the same thing for other universities. So the application process is only difficult in the sense that most universities tend to look at your grades alone and not your extracurriculars. But not all universities work that way.
Yeah, because I've been also applying to universities, and it's weird, like the variety of some of them only just ask for grades, and others will go in depth.
Yeah.
So you're at U of A.
Yep.
How did you choose U of A? Why? And did you apply to any other universities?
I did apply to other universities. So I applied to a variety. Like I applied to UBC's dual, I think, degree program, which was engineering and a business minor. And then I applied to many universities in Toronto and Ontario. So, and I applied to Calgary and University of Calgary and University of Alberta. So the reason I ended up choosing University of Alberta was, first off, it's like fairly close to Fort McMurray, which is my hometown, right? So it's like it's easier if my parents wanted to visit me or if I wanted to go visit them, right? The cost of living is also a lot lower than it is in something like UBC if you were to go to Vancouver or if you were going to Ontario or Toronto, right? Because even something like the residence costs are quite high there, right? So that was the main reason. But I believe I ended up choosing U of A over University of Calgary was because for me, for the degree that I was pursuing, which is electrical engineering, the difference between the two engineering faculties wasn't too much. Like they're very similar, especially the co-op programs where like University of Calgary will also give you a co-op program for about the same length of time as U of A. So it's almost the exact same. It's just that both universities execute their like learning methods differently. So I don't know if you want to look into that too much, but
yeah, okay, yeah, that's reasonable. Yeah, understandable. So how different was university from high school?
Okay, so for me, it was like completely different. I don't know about some other people's. It's similar in the sense that it's recommended that you do attend lecture still. However, no one is going to force you. Like it's not mandatory to attend a lecture if you don't want to. Some students choose to do self-learning off of textbooks, which you can always buy or buy off the bookstore in U of A, right? Or you can find some old textbooks online. I know a few people that have only never gone to a single lecture, but have learned everything that they needed to learn strictly from textbooks, and some people prefer it that way. The other thing is that some classes will give you things like homework, right, which are worth marks, but others will not. So they'll give you practice problems, but it's things that you have to do at your own discretion. So in the sense that I'd had this bad experience once, like I didn't do a few practice questions for a certain subject until I realized a midterm was coming up, and it wasn't the best idea since, when you're not forced or like, given an incentive to do something, you'll usually tend to not do it, right? Since the workload that you get from high school to university engineering at least is a big difference in the sense that although you do have a lot more time to do your homework, since as Justin said, first year you'll have maybe around 3 hours of classes each day, right? You'll also have a lot more homework in the sense that you'll also have to learn a lot more things, since lectures cannot explain everything that you need to know. Some of it's also self-learning. So I think that's the biggest difference. Whereas in high school, if you learn something in a lecture, most of it would be like you would also be able to put that to use in your homework. In university, you'll learn the concept in the lectures, and then you'll have to apply it to the homework yourself. So you'll have to think about it more.
Okay.
I think the only other difference is mainly in terms of residence and other things like that. Like living alone is quite different as well.
Yeah. You mentioned textbooks, and I hear a lot of university students talk about like the expense. Yeah.
Okay. So regarding the textbooks, right? So I will say you can find a lot of old versions that are very similar to the new versions online. So all the practice questions are mainly the exact same, right? Maybe just the way that the textbooks like executed in terms of helping you learn might be slightly different. It doesn't mean that most of the material is outdated unless you're doing like a textbook which is like 50 years old, then most of it is probably outdated. However, there is an application that U of A students can download. I don't remember the exact name for it, right? But on there, some students do tend to sell their old textbooks, right? So you can buy them at a significantly cheaper price. I think they sell it for a lot less unless it's like a completely new textbook. So that's how most students tend to do it. Of course, the other thing is that you can find PDFs if you wish to, or you can like use your friends, or if you know a peer that's like a year above you and they tend to have a textbook, then they might allow you to use theirs, right? So, but I know that the best way if you want to keep a textbook to yourself would probably be to buy one from another student, since it tends to be a lot cheaper.
Okay, good to know. Yeah. Are there any strategies you used or anything that helped you ease the transition from high school to university?
Okay, so the best way to ease the transition, at least in the sense, I would say, is to find a good friend group. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's like if you were alone in university, everything is a lot more difficult in the sense that if you don't know a concept, your only option is to ask a professor, and the professor might teach it in a way that you're unable to understand. Whereas if it's someone your own age, there's a higher chance of them being able to explain the concept to you at a level where you're able to understand, right? And you'll feel more comfortable around them, right? So I would say that having a friend group is very advantageous in the sense that it'll help you complete your assignments, it'll help you learn more, right? And it'll also just like ease the process of like you'll have a lot more fun. I want to say that because most people tend to think that doing a STEM course or doing an engineering course is quite boring and the workload's quite a lot. But if you manage your time correctly and just have a good friend group, I feel like you'll enjoy university a lot more. Yeah,
Okay.
Justin and me did do a lot of assignments together first year.
Well, that's good. Interesting to know. Okay. So what was your daily workload like?
So I want to say the workload isn't. So listen, the way it works in university is that time management is a very big role. If you're a big procrastinator, it's probably not going to work out that well for you. Like people will say this in high school, even though you can manage to procrastinate in high school, whereas in university, if you do that, it's quite unhealthy. I want to say that. Like you'll be very stressed out. So time management is really big. So if you manage to like maybe not complete a whole assignment before the due date, but like do parts every day so that you can work on it, it'll help you learn a lot more. You'll get a lot more stuff going into your brain. The other thing is that the workload is more than high school. I believe it's like that for most university courses, no matter what degree you take. Most of the workload will be a lot more than high school, right? Whether you're writing essays, whether you're doing labs, right? In engineering, you would have the reason it's more is because you'd have something like lab works, right? In high school, you also had labs, but labs in university are a lot different from the way they are in high school. They work in the same way that you have a set time limit to complete it, right? And you also have to follow certain steps, but the steps aren't as simple as like, you can complete the lab within an hour. You have to analyze everything, you have to write everything down, you have to observe everything, right? So I would say the biggest change in terms of workload for me was, one is that you have a lot more things that you can learn about, right? And the other thing is that your subjects give a bit more homework than they usually would in high school, especially if you add the 2 labs on top. Of course, the labs first year are like alternating, so you'll have like a week to do them most of the time. But it is a bit more homework. I don't want to say it's excessively more, but I think the reason most people tend to, say that university first year is a lot more difficult is because if you're living alone, it makes it a lot harder for you to like, dedicate yourself to study a lot more, especially if something isn't worth anything. If it isn't worth grades, right? I've seen I myself and a lot of other people have just like, just like sacked it off onto the other side and like focused on something that is worth grades, right? Which usually isn't the right thing to do. So I would say it's a lot more, self-dependent than high school.
Okay. And do you have any like advice or like tips to like stay organized and stay on task and make sure like you're like on top of all your homework and stuff?
So the best way to do this is that I didn't realize this in first year, and I do kind of regret it, is that now that I'm in a third year course, right, you have a lot more assignments in the sense that they're daily, right? So there's a lot more things that you have to do, whether they're worth marks or not. What I just started doing like recently, which I regret not doing early on, was doing a to-do list, right? So I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's like I'm using like an application that Microsoft has. It's like the Microsoft to-do list or whatever, right? Which just helps me keep track of all the due dates and assignments, right? So I didn't do this in the beginning, right? And this made it so that you'd have a lot of things, even though they weren't hard to do, you would just forget about them from time to time. So I had a bad habit of forgetting about my assignments, and I think this helped me a lot this year. So I suggest that if you do want to like, keep on top of all your work, you do set up a to-do list instead of like, just clicking through eClass. eClass is the application you use, like the U of A application, where you get all your homework assigned to you. Instead of clicking through each thing and checking if you have homework, it's just a lot more efficient to like know the due dates from your to-do list and everything and just keep on top of it.
Okay, I'll definitely keep that in mind. Did you have any jobs or extracurriculars, and how did you manage to balance them with your schoolwork?
So at least my first year, I did not have any jobs, right? Extracurriculars was something that I was looking into, right? I did join a few volunteer organizations, like CMY being one of them, just listing one of the examples. Of course, I thought about joining a club, but the clubs that I was interested in did require a lot of dedication and time, right? So I myself didn't feel too confident about doing it, right? Because I felt like I would need a lot more time to learn certain concepts, since I believe they hold something called a club fair, right? 1 or 2 weeks within university. So at that time, you can see a whole bunch of different clubs. You can see things like sororities and things promoting themselves. You can see things about like the Satellite Club, or U of A Sat is one of them, right? EcoCar is another. You can see all these different types of clubs promoting STEM learning or promoting a different kind of art, right? So the club that I did want to join, it was required that you would have to spend a certain amount of time each week and like help them do certain things, right? So when I was a first year, after doing 2 weeks of university, for me, I didn't feel too confident in myself that I wanted to join a club, so I couldn't. But I feel like it's different for each person, so I definitely recommend you go check a few of these out. They might be interesting. You'll learn a lot more. You'll find like it's a lot more fun to meet new people outside of the people you already know as well, things like that. But as for jobs, I believe I only looked for a job over the summer in my second year. Of course, it's different. I know a person to like pay off his tuition fees since he's an international student. He does work part-time, but I do also know that it's very difficult for him in engineering, at least, because he works about 4 to 3 hours a day, and it's not like the whole time, right? It's like maybe 2 or 3 days a week, but he spends a lot of time invested into there. So if you're willing to do that, of course you can, but I recommend that if you do have the chance, you look for a job in the summer, right? Since a lot of places offer internships. Maybe not for second year students, but even if you get any sort of internship, whether it's paid or unpaid, it's really good experience. And if you're in a co-op program like me or Justin, right, it'll help you find a job a lot quicker. Since I know that after I did a job in the summer, it was a site job, it helped me find another job really quickly since they already knew I had prior work experience related to my electrical engineering field or anything else. So it's really helpful. Even doing club activities, a lot of it can be applied to things that you do at work, like, if you're doing like budget management in a lot of clubs, it does help a lot for a person who is interviewing you since they know that you have experience in something like that. So yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned how like you were looking into extracurriculars, but you like didn't manage any within like your first years, right? Did you have lots of extracurriculars in high school?
In high school, I did have a lot more extracurriculars, like simply just because that the amount of time that I had in high school was a lot more than I did have in university. Of course, my living situation is different from a lot of first years, since a lot of first years tend to live on residence, which I do highly recommend. It'll help you find a lot more friends, that you can join a lot more activities that are on campus, right? But, since I have a diet that's quite hard to like, cope with if you buy a meal plan, right? And back then in first year, the new residences weren't made so that for the male residences at least you didn't have a kitchen, or the kitchen you had was shared, which is, it's like if you have a whole floor of say 50 students, and then all 50 can't use the same shared kitchen at the same time, for example, right? So I lived off campus, so of course doing like I was using the transit, and that took away probably around an hour to an hour 30 minutes because of traffic, right? So each day I would waste about that much time in total. So of course it's different for each student, right? I would say maybe if I didn't have the issue of going back and forth to university, I might have taken extracurriculars, right? Since I would have the extra time to do so.
Yeah. So what made you decide to not live on campus?
Okay, so my decision to not live on campus was mainly because I do have a strict diet. So I am a vegetarian and I have a gluten allergy. So having these two things, although U of A's meal plan is like, they would be able to like, sometimes they'll help you adapt to it, right? I felt like having the chance to make my own meals and things, even though it does take up some of my time, it would just be a lot more healthier for myself if I enjoy the food that I make, right? So I did do that. However, I suggest that even if you do live off campus, it's better if you have a roommate. It just makes life a lot more fun. I believe my roommate was also a first year engineer. He's now doing mechanical engineering actually. Right. So it's like, having him to room with me, it made things a lot easier whenever we did cook, right? Since you would have two people to cook, it's just twice as fast. It made it a lot more fun whenever we were on break. So we would just go hang out, go back into the city, do whatever, right? So even if you do live off campus, I want to say the costs for both are relatively similar. It's as Justin said, in terms of meals, right? Sometimes you will be like, you will be tempted to just order out instead of cooking it yourself. I would say that though, in terms of cost between if you were paying something like $2,000 for a meal plan, or I don't know exactly how much it is, I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Whereas cooking for yourself, buying groceries is usually cheaper, but it is also how Justin said that you will be sometimes, tempted to get like a whole pack of pizza, since it's just easier to just like, get it ordered to your doorstep rather than cooking it. So there is that. And of course, it's a lot more unhealthy if you do that as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's understandable. So tuition. How did you deal with like the cost of tuition, and just how did you deal with it?
Okay, so as I remember, tuition in first year was actually $200 cheaper for each course than it is now. So tuition has increased. But for first year, I would say that you can worry about tuition, but you also should know that you can get many different types of scholarships. Like it's not just restricted to things like, oh, you need a 3.5 to be like, to be possibly chosen for this $2,000 scholarship. It's not like that. You can get scholarships from anywhere. There's all kinds of different types of scholarships that many people don't even take or sign up for. So sometimes you might just be the only person, and if you're the only person, they'll probably give it to you, right? So there's things like that. Of course, if you're really worried about tuition, you can choose to work over the summer or do a part-time job. Of course, that's dependent on how well you handle the workload, right? But if you do choose to work over the summer, which is what most students tend to do, because it helps them gather work experience for a future job that they might have. So yeah, it's a lot better to do that. I know other people who are worried about tuition. Some people are just not worried about tuition costs since they'll just pay it off after they graduate, right? Since if you do work if you do have an engineering degree, you will be able to find a decently well-paying job quite fast. I don't want to say right now because of all the COVID situations or anything, right? But before you were able to do that, right? Of course, engineering has an option called co-op. So for co-op, after you do your first general year, right, you will have the option to choose a discipline, and most disciplines offer a co-op option. So I believe that almost every university that has engineering offers a co-op choice. So what co-op is that what U of A will make a schedule for you, which will have work terms. So for my work terms, I had 4, 8 months, and 8 months for internships. So they'll help you find an internship. Of course, you'll have to do the interviews and the application process yourself, but they'll help you find jobs that maybe you otherwise couldn't find it or you just didn't know about, right? So there's that. And doing co-op, even if it's like a minimum wage paying job, doing co-op overall will probably help you pay off your whole tuition. I don't want to say it's the same for other people, but it does help a lot. I will say that. So if you're worried about tuition, it's something that's different for each person. Of course, if you're an international student, it's completely different since you're paying a lot more than what other students may be paying. So their situation, I can't really speak on their behalf, but for me specifically, having co-op does help with that, just because your internship money does help you pay it off. So there's that.
Okay, that's helpful. Did you apply to any like scholarships?
So I did apply to a few scholarships, right? So U of A has 2 scholarships. I don't remember what they're exactly called. I believe one of them is called like a Jason Bourne scholarship. I don't quote me on this, right? So that scholarship is purely GPA based, whereas like if your overall GPA is above a 3.2, for example, you'll have the chance of getting $2,000 for a scholarship. Of course, there's many other scholarships. Like I believe I also applied for the University of Calgary Diversity Scholarship. This was during my yeah, it's Jason Lang. I'm sorry. Okay, this was during my application process to the universities in 12th grade, right? So of course, at this point, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to U of A, but there are many scholarships. And for example, that diversity scholarship was quite a bit. It was about 5,000, if I'm not wrong, right? So it's dependent. So it's like if you truly want a scholarship, there's a lot. Many of them aren't even related to engineering, but you can apply to them, right? Just because maybe your extracurriculars match up, or you can just write a full essay on it, right? But it's completely dependent on you that you have to find them yourself. The university will help you find a few, but a lot of it is like you have to look for them, and you have to be willing to look for them and put in the work to apply to them.
Okay, so good to know. How did you budget, especially in your first year?
Okay, so my budgeting for the first year, I want to say that we did tend to budget in the sense that we would eat out a lot less. Of course, if you do choose to eat out, you typically go for fast food since it's just extremely cheap, right? It would be like the same thing as buying like a full bag of groceries, right, and cooking the meal yourself, but a lot more unhealthy. So in terms of budgeting for food, it wasn't. It was like I don't want to say I had a set price that I would like spend each month, but I want to say if you were just going strictly off of groceries, I wouldn't spend more than $300 a month, even if it was, and this is for 2 people combined, right? So this is for me and my roommate. Of course, I'm not including snacks like maybe something like cookies in there, right? But if you want cookies, obviously it's going to cost you more, right? So there's that. But in terms of living cost and apartment cost, if you have a roommate, I found it to be a lot cheaper than residence. I will say that. Even with the transit, since I believe that U of A only requires you to pay a specific amount for like a yearly U pass, is what they say, to use the LRT and the busing system, right? So even with the transit, it was for me a lot cheaper But in terms of time, if you feel like you're going to waste too much time busing or something like that, then of course you would rather choose to spend more money than to waste that time. For me, it wasn't that big of a deal, right? Since it's an hour and 30 minutes in the whole day. You could just like maybe stay up an extra hour and then sleep an extra hour. You can somehow manage your time properly. Maybe cuts into your break time. Who knows, right? So there was that. But like for my situation, my current apartment in first year at least, since I'm sure that most of you are going to university next year or within the next few years, right? So for me, my first year was more so that I had to pay approximately, let's say, a $1,400. This was just if one person was living there. But if it's two people, it was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment with the kitchen and a big living room, right? I will say having 2 bathrooms or having your own bathroom does feel a lot better than having a shared one, which I believe Justin, or if you are living on some residences, of course. For example, St. Joe's, I believe you have to do a shared washroom. You have to use a shared washroom. Whereas if you live in Lister, you have your own room with your own washroom, right? So having 2 washrooms was quite nice, and it was only basically $700 per person, which is about $200 cheaper per month for residency costs. So I would say that if you do end up spending extra money, if you have a roommate, you can use that extra money in say your meal plan or like days out that you go out to eat with your friends or something like that. Since I know that typically some students, like at least for me, and like all our whole first year group usually like tended to go out after we'd finish exams, whether it's to eat or do whatever, right? So you'd spend a bit of money there. But yeah, in terms of budgeting, I want to say it's quite similar to residency.
Okay, good to know. Are there any tools that you think people, especially in engineering, should invest in early on?
So definitely, I want to say that if your budget allows it, if you do plan on going into something like mechanical or civil, I don't want to say chemical because I don't believe for chemical engineering that's required, or if you're doing an electrical or anything related to electrical engineering software or 3D design, right? I suggest that you do have a good computer which can handle those programs. So I know that it's not in everyone's budget to be able to do that, but and sometimes you will if you live on res, you can always use the school computers for this. But if for those students who don't, I would recommend you have a computer that's able to handle all these programs. Since I know that, at least from my experience, I'm using like a 10-year-old MacBook, for example, right? And it's not able to handle something like multi-threading in the software course that I'm doing, since it would crash each time, which isn't ideal. So I had to use a school computer for that. I would say the best investment you can probably make is to buy a tablet, right? I would say the best writing tool is an iPad. I don't want this to influence it since just because the iPad is quite expensive, right? But I would say the tablet is probably the best investment I've made since my first year, just because if you have something like 6 courses, it's hard to carry 6 booklets. And especially if you're carrying a textbook with you, there's only so much your school bag can carry. And on top of that, it's quite heavy. So, having a digital writing tool makes it a lot easier for you to store your homework, access it easily. You can access it on almost every single digital device, depending on the application you use, right? So just in terms of convenience and not having to like lose anything, you don't lose any of the papers, for example, or notebooks, right? You won't lose your pencils, who knows, right? So in terms of convenience, I would say the tablet is the best investment that you can probably make, at least for me. I don't know if it's the same for other students. Maybe they like to type up their notes. I don't know. But I find that writing is a lot better for me. So I bought a tablet, and I feel like it was probably the best investment that I've made so far.
Yeah, I also much prefer writing, but I have a tendency to lose my notes when
Yeah.
they're just on paper.
Especially if you write, like I would say in engineering, you'll probably write out a lot of your homework. So you spend a lot of time writing, and especially if you're drawing things out, just being able to like copy paste a drawing and putting it on another page is a lot easier than drawing the same diagram again.
Yeah.
So it's just a convenience. It's worth it in my opinion.
Okay, I'll definitely look into that. What parts of your journey were the most frustrating or the most difficult to navigate?
I want to say that the most difficult part, for me at least, was just the learning curve is very different. So and setting realistic standards. So let's say I don't want to say I was a straight A student in high school, but I would say that I was pretty smart. I would say I was around like 90s to high 90s in terms of averages. But I would say in university it's very different. It's just as Justin said, a high 90 doesn't necessarily translate to a good GPA in university. So the way it works is that the whole learning process is completely different from high school, as I believe I've said that before. So you'd have to like adapt to it. And if you're able to adapt to the university lifestyle, then you would have a high GPA, or you'll have a lot easier time learning, even if you don't have a high GPA. Since of course it's the knowledge that matters, it's not your overall GPA that does. So there's many things that even if I wasn't like a high 90 student in university, in some courses I'd only be considered average or sometimes below average, right? And having a realistic expectation, even though you want to get something like a 4.0, you shouldn't feel too bad if you get something like a 3.0 in a subject, or even lower than that, right? Since it's a whole different learning system, and you have to learn to adapt to this, right? Like I remember the first time I got like a 30% on a midterm. Okay, it's very low, even considering class average standards, right? I just couldn't study for it because I felt like I just blanked out on it. So after blanking out, it just tells you like my standards that I've been trying to live up to were too high, in the sense that I haven't completely adapted to this new lifestyle, and it's going to take some time, right? So you shouldn't put yourself down about that. Don't put yourself down over that. Just like you'll slowly adapt to it, and then once you adapt to it, maybe increase your standards, or like maybe set a new goal that you want to achieve, right? Whether that be related to GPA, whether that be something you want to learn or do, whatever it is.
Okay, yeah. Good to know. And what parts were like most exciting, or in what ways did you feel really fulfilled?
So I want to say what was most fulfilling is like the new lifestyle. I do want to say that for most students who were going to high school, usually you tend to live with your parents or a guardian, right? Just not having to live with them gives you like I don't know how to say it. It's like an extra sense of freedom, I want to say. Right? So it feels completely different. Like you feel like, oh, I can do a lot more things because I'm an adult, right? You'll have a lot more chances to do things like club activities, which you wouldn't normally do. There's a lot of university events that are hosted. Like, I don't know, sometimes you can go watch the football game. There's that. There's other sports that I believe the University of Alberta participates in as well. So, being able to go to all these different events, even learning all these different things in engineering, like some of the labs were quite new. Like I actually got, like for chemistry, for example, right? You get to work with a lot more chemicals that you normally wouldn't, a lot more lab equipment that you would never get to touch in high school. Either they were too expensive, too precious. I don't know. There's a lot of different things that you get to do more hands-on, rather than just like sitting back and watching all these people do it back then, right? So there is that. I would say that was the most fulfilling part, just having the opportunity to try out new things, live that new university lifestyle where there's like almost no parents, no guardians. It's just like you and your friends, right? It's just a whole new like type of fun. I want to say that.
Yeah. That freedom seems pretty cool. So are there any misconceptions about the field of like electrical engineering?
Okay, so specifically electrical engineering, I want to say that when normally when you the misconception of engineering overall is that since you're in engineering, people would typically think you're boring, or you just don't have enough time to do other things. I want to say that if you do manage your time properly, you can do a lot more things. I believe that in my first year, I was probably too panicked to like, go outside and think that, oh, I'm wasting time outside or something, whereas I could be studying. It's like if you study hard and like, you do all your homework and assignments, you have more than enough time to like, take a break, enjoy yourself, right? I realize this now, but in first year, I probably could have taken like at least one day each week just to like relax or go outside with my friends or do something cool, right? So there's that's like the main misconception about engineering, which is that, oh, if you're in it, you're usually a boring student and you just wouldn't have time to do other things. Whereas I feel like you do have some time to do other things. Of course, there's times where you have a lot of homework, right? But that's in years later on. And it's just like something that all students deal with as time goes by, even if you're in something like sciences. I believe that as each year increases, you'll have a lot, like you'll get used to the workload, but you'll have a lot more work. So it's your choice whether to invest time in learning the thing or you want to take a break. It's just these choices you'd have to make. So I want to say that that's the biggest like misconception or stereotype that most people have about engineering or any STEM course in general.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting for sure. And finally, what was the best advice you learned that helped you on your university journey?
Okay, so the best advice that I learned is that I want to say that you shouldn't set your standards extremely high just from the get-go. I want to say that if you slowly ease yourself into it, like on the first week, maybe get used to it. Like, learn all the new things about university, maybe take a tour on campus, just like get used to the whole new lifestyle that you're probably about to do for like the next 5 years, right? I don't want to say like, oh, just set your standard, like, oh, I just need to like get this 4.0 or else I'm just like a failure or something. No, it's not how it works. You'll learn that as you like go on each year, right? There's realistic standards for each thing. And it's like you can also say that, oh, if you don't enjoy a subject, right? You like just try and learn it anyway, since I feel that you will probably like, you'll use it later on, whether that be like in the future years or in your future work endeavors, who knows. The other thing is that I do want to say that you will come across times when you have to make decisions to study certain things or choose one thing over the other. Since I know that at least for this year for me, I did have to choose between, okay, do I want to have fun? Do I want to study this subject over another subject? It's like, what do I enjoy more? It's like even if you have homework in certain times, you won't be able to choose. It's like, do I want to do the homework for this course or do I want to do it for this course? I feel like decision making is also a big thing that you'll have to work on in university, and it's something that you get used to over time. So I think that the best advice is like don't just jump into it, take it step by step and set your goals accordingly, at least for me.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, Ishan. I think that concludes the interview portion. So I guess we're going to move on to questions now. And I'm going to assume that the questions are directed towards both Justin and Ishan.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good idea to like let them both pipe in if they
Sure.
both can contribute. I think that's great.
Okay. First question. Do you guys have any hobbies that are just like helping you relax, especially like during quarantine, that you might have developed?
I don't know about Justin, but at least for myself, I don't know. I like to try different kinds of food, so I like usually tend to like maybe go out on a weekend just to try like a different cuisine or something, or I'd read a book. I feel that reading is more so my hobby, even though it's kind of boring. I think that it's probably the best for me. I like reading things like not fiction novels and things like that, so I just tend to do that most of the time, or watch YouTube. That's always good.
Yeah, that's fair.
Is this for the question in the chat? So like I guess like good hobbies, I would say for during university, that's what I'll aim my answer towards. I found intramural sports at U of A really awesome. I kind of stopped playing sports in the last 2 years of high school, but at U of A, especially with residents, like I was playing sports like 4 or 5 days a week. Just go for an hour soccer game, go for an hour of water polo, alternate frisbee, volleyball. I think those are really great just to, exercise really good for your mind and just to take a step back. As well as other hobbies, I do play like a lot of video games. Or not a lot anymore, but I'm in computer engineering, so I do have my fair share of gaming, and it's a pretty common hobby, I'd say.
Agreed. Another question from Umar. He's asking, is self-learning a generally good idea? Or are class materials focused on more for tests and exams? Where would it be a good idea to attend?
That's quite difficult to answer. I think it's dependent on each person. Since I know that for myself, I find that going to class helps you get all of the general information, right? And then if you want to go into more specifics, it's always good to look into a textbook or something like that. But I do know that for other people, some professors have a different teaching style from other professors. It's not going to be the same teaching method every single class, right? Since you have to understand that each professor teaches a different way. And whether you like the way that they teach or you don't is probably what determines whether you want to do self-learning later on or not. since I know that one of my friends never attends any lectures just because he finds that learning it himself is just a lot better for him. But I feel like you'll get a better handle on things if you attend a few classes and you realize that, oh, maybe I should learn this myself since I'm not able to understand a professor due to any of the reasons that I've just listed, right?
Okay.
I would say self-learning is like always generally a good idea. A lot of engineering students will just love to learn about pretty much anything, even if it's not. Personally, I like to learn about anything, even if it's not related to computer engineering. For the class sense, I'd recommend like 90% of people to go to lectures. It's pretty much just guarantees that you actually get there and write down the information.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to procrastinate learning from the textbook when it's so self-regulated, whereas a lecture time is like it's a set schedule. Yeah, exactly. And as for the class materials, it depends on the class. Like something like math, where it's or like calculus, for instance, it's pretty much all just from the textbook. You know, calculus hasn't really changed in like 200 years. But for instance, I'm in a materials science class right now, and my professor told us to, for our final exam coming up, don't study too much off the textbook because she's kind of just pick and chose some of the important chapters and some of the important things from the chapters. So she said focus on our in-class notes and our in-class examples because the textbook has a lot of stuff that we didn't really deal with. So it will depend class by class mostly.
Okay. There's only one more question, so guys, keep on typing your questions in the chat. Tochi is asking, what type of extracurriculars would be good to have?
I'd say whatever really interests you is the most basic answer that I can give. I wouldn't say that any specific extracurricular is better than another, right? Since I would say you would enjoy something the most if you enjoy learning it, right? And if you enjoy learning it, the knowledge will probably just come by itself, right? Regarding that extracurricular. So that's what I want to say. I don't know if there's any way to say that, oh, joining this club is better than joining this club, or doing this is better than this. It's all basically dependent on yourself and what you would like to do later on, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I generally agree with that too. I guess it depends what the question's asking. Like, if you mean before high school, as if you want extracurriculars to get into university, I'd say a lot of university applications and I guess scholarship applications, they look for things like taking initiative, leadership, making a positive impact in a community. Any clubs that can do that are pretty awesome, and usually you get some pretty great experience out of that you can talk about. As for extracurriculars, maybe university, like, yeah, as Sean said, join something if you're actually interested in it. If you're just doing it just to boost your resume or something, you probably won't be very dedicated to it. So if you actually have something that you like to learn about and actually can get in depth in, it pretty much doesn't matter what the club is if you can talk about it and show that you're interested in that. I think it's beneficial.
Okay. Thank you so much. Those are the only questions we have. So
yeah, if anyone has any else, please, we're happy to answer.
Well, okay. Scholarship applications, right? I find those like really intimidating, right? Do you have like any advice, like on just
just in general?
Yeah.
Sean, you want to go first?
Okay, I do want to say that if scholarship applications, at least, they usually don't look for someone who's normally bragging about themselves or like certain things, right? Of course, you need like some of the minimum qualifications, but if you did something right, or like if you're doing an extracurricular that you like, typically you would be able to talk about it in your own way, right? Whether that be in an essay format, in a professional format, or just like a typical story writing format, something like that. They just look for someone who's able to talk about what they've done pretty well, is what I tend to see, right? So if you've done something like research, right, they would expect you to be able to talk about that research later on. So it's like, say if there was a question regarding, say if it was a really specific question regarding something like you've done before, right, you would be able to talk about it. And if you can talk about it pretty well, I would say that that's pretty good for an essay, at least, that you're submitting for a scholarship or something like that. But that's only for some scholarship applications. I believe that some of them don't even ask for an essay, and it's just like, typical yes or no questions and things like that. So I don't think there's any need to be afraid of scholarship applications, because it's not like anything bad will happen. You can always move on to the next scholarship and apply, right? But the more you do, typically the better you'll get at writing them. So it's like, I would suggest that you shouldn't be too intimidated by them, since there are many people who are like facing the same situation as you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with Sean as well. Like, the nice part about scholarship applications is that they don't come to your house and beat you up if you don't get it. The worst they can say is no. And especially, I hear that a lot of scholarships actually go unclaimed if there isn't any applicants even. Yeah. I would say just in general, for scholarships, that there are usually minimum, like some sort of hard skill qualifications. So like they might be looking for a minimum grade or like a specific program, or some, a lot of scholarships are geared towards some specific subset of people. But a lot of them just want to hear about like your soft skills, like what you do as a person, how you communicate, how you lead, how you've made an impact. And then, yeah, just being able to talk about your experience, I think is probably the more important part.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. Eases my mind a little. Another question in the chat. Do you guys know of any good websites or sources to find scholarships?
Scholarshipscanada.ca.
Yeah, that's probably the main one. Of course, there are other places where you can, like if you were to go on the university website, for example, you'd find a lot of scholarships that are sponsored by the university, right? Whether that be for Toronto, U of A, U of C, any of the following. Of course, if your parents do also work in a company, some companies do offer scholarships for their children, right? So that's something that you can ask your parents if it's something that the place that they work at does offer. I believe that those are two other sources where you can probably find a few scholarships.
Another thing, check on like for U of A. I know they have some stuff on the website, but entrance scholarships are actually where most of my scholarships came from. And entrance scholarships just mean that like as you're admitted to university, they're gonna put your name and grades into just like the pool for these scholarships that are literally just for people entering university. And like I'm quite honest, I got about $5,000, I think, for having a 95 average going into university. And I know it can vary based off your average. Yeah. Some people get more, some people get a bit less. And then I even got another one just for community involvement or something like that. There's U of A specific, there's a awards and financial support section where you can check for any active scholarships. There's a big application to do where you do like a bunch of yes or no questions and a couple short answer responses, and then it puts you in the pool for a whole bunch of scholarships. And I think that's probably that's probably the best chance you have for like U of A specific students.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I have a question about your master's. Do any of you guys plan on like getting a master's?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah, I'm looking into it. Although I don't know which university or where I want to go for the master's, although I do want to think that I would want to go to the States, at least for my master's degree. just for like a change of pace, and like, you know, the job field there is a lot bigger than it is in Canada as well. So that's one of the reasons. As for what I specifically want to do yet, I'm not too sure about it, but yeah, it is something that I'm looking into, but it'll depend on like how I feel about, you know, working right after my degree, or do I want to put in the extra effort to specialize in something?
Yeah.
Do you have any like specific questions about masters, or or even just thoughts about it? Like,
well, do you find that most people like switch to a different university to get their masters?
I'm not sure. Yeah,
okay, you know, go on.
Okay. I would say it's pretty common. Of course, there is also like PhD after masters. So I find that usually people won't stay at the same university for like, or a lot of professors won't be at the same university for all 3 degrees. A lot of my professors come from, you know, a bachelor's degree in Europe maybe, and then come over to U of T to do a master's, and U of A to do their PhD, and they've stayed here. My older brother, actually, I guess this is kind of applicable. He's applied to a master's program at U of A. So he found it was really nice because in his 4th year courses, when classes got smaller, and he found a course that he really liked, he started talking with the professor. He got to listen in on some of his grad student meetings with already current master's students. And now he's actually kind of lined up and applied for master's funding with that professor. So I guess it depends kind of what you're looking for. Once you decide to specialize, you kind of need to have a professor that'll supervise your master's or PhD. And some, you know, say it's something really specific, you might actually not be able to find that at your university, and might want to go to a different one to find a professor that matches your interests more.
Okay, good to know. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions in the chat? Doesn't seem like it.
Last chance, everybody.
And sorry, I think it actually might be scholarshipscanada.com. I'm not sure. Scholarships. Give a shot.
Thank you for that. I just want to make sure it's in the chat in case people just want to zoom over there right away, because that's sometimes helpful.
No problem. Yeah, I didn't remember if it was .com or .ca.
Well, I think that's everything. I think that's all for today. So I'll let Ovine and Cameron wrap up, and we will sign off.
Okay. So thank you so much, Justin, and thank you so much, Ishan, for taking time out of your day to join us in this interview and answer all of our burning questions about university. And
thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you so much for coming. I hope it helped.
Yeah, thank you so much. Torchy's asking, will the recording be sent out for reference? It'll be posted on the website, the We Buffalo
I'm going to
website.
put it up right in the chat here. The exact page, you will be able to check it out. Right where the same page that you registered for the event. That's exactly where it will be. And I don't know how quickly it will be. It is a busy time of year, but I'm going to say by after Christmas, this will be up on the website. And then we'll continue through our University Speaker Series until March. We'll have 3 more between now and March, and they will also be posted. So stay tuned. And last year, I believe, are still there as well. So if anybody wanted to check that out from last year, please feel free.
Okay.
Thank you guys for having us.
Right, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Have a great rest
Thank
of
you,
your day,
Sean. Thank you, Justin.
Yep.
And Christian says good luck on your finals.
Good luck on your finals.
Thanks, Christian. You too.
Yeah, thanks, Jess.